Hey guys, so we still don't know when the next ban list will drop, but best to do these predictions early, so big thanks to the 250 players who responded to my prediction survey. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter so that you don't miss out on any future ones. And before we continue with the results, a big thanks to my sponsors. Make sure to check out my discount codes and links below for Yu-Gi-Oh supplies. Now in terms of the competitiveness of the player base who responded to the survey, about 3/4 of the respondents identified as at least semi-competitive, so they at least regularly attend local events. We did have a decent chunk in 22% being casual players as well, so those who only play online and or with friends only. So let's get started with the predictions of the currently unlimited cards, starting with Tearlament's Havness. Over half predict that this card will get limited, and I definitely do hope this happens because this is a card that is allowing Tearlaments to be so dominant even on your opponent's turn, because it can just trigger a snowball effects, and I think reducing the consistency of that happening will be a start to nerf them down. Next we have Merly, which about a quarter thought it would get limited, and I'm not sure if the next list would really even hit tier monsters all that much, and certainly not all of them in the same list. Merly is something that can get dumped by sprint, but reducing the number of any tier names realistically helps in making the deck less consistent. And then for Sharon, even a third also think that this card would get limited, and I don't think it's too realistic. I mean, it's a strong card for sure and allows for the special summon, can help trigger a Ghidorah or Kelbeck, and under Shifter, it can help you enable going into Bagooska pass, but still likely will not change on the next list in my opinion. Next we have Rhino Heart, which 28% predict would get limited. I think this got hit in the OCG as well, and is definitely a strong card, and it allows for a guaranteed fusion play, not to mention is key in getting you to Kaleido Heart for some massive interruptions on your opponent's turn. Probably will get hit at some point, but I don't know if it would get the smack on this next list, but likely in a future list. Then we have Kid Kalos, and we actually have half the respondents predicting this card will get banned. Now this card actually got banned in the OCG, which makes it a bit realistic that it could happen for us as well. You would think that Tearlaments would completely die without Kid, but the OCG has just been playing King of the Swamp instead to serve as a substitute fusion name, and is still doing very well over there. Perhaps the TCG just limits it this time around, which doesn't really do too much since most were playing 1 up until now. Although with Kashtira about to become a new tier 1 deck, tier players will definitely ideally want 2 kids, and Konami has been known to make some questionable limits in the past. And then we have Planet, and 2/3 predict that this card will at least get limited, and I hope this happens as well. This has to be one of the best field spells ever printed because all of its effects are so useful. What ended up getting crazier post Magnificent Mavens is that Ishizu cards can just shuffle your tier monsters and trigger the planet on command, which makes things too strong. It being able to search and providing attack boost for so many of the monsters means it's just gotta get at least limited. On to some Ishizu cards, we first have Agito the Miller, which a big chunk and 37% predict would get limited. Not sure if this one would really get hit at this point, it's definitely not as strong as Kelbeck. Speaking of Kelbeck, almost half predict that this card would get limited. Aside from being able to mill 5, its effect to bounce as a hand trap is sneaky good, and being able to limit any of the millers will be a good start as it allows tier plays to get out of control. And then we have Keldo as one of the Grave Shufflers, and this also got hit in the OCG because this one can just search any of your Ishizu monsters, not to mention itself, so allows you to generate advantage and can be an easy way to set up Bagooska when you get hit with Shifter. Next we have Medora, which 39% predict it would get limited. My hope is that these Grave Shufflers both get some kind of hit because it really makes most rogue decks and of course a lot of meta contenders really difficult to play. They really should not have been made as quick effects, and the fact that they can just shuffle not just 1 but 3 cards is pretty insane. And then we have Super Poly, which is kind of interesting to see in terms of the results because the results for this for a couple of ban lists ago was much different. At this point, this card is actually not seeing too much play, but we do know that it will become great again at some point, so this is probably a card that will go back to 1 at some point. Next we have Dweller, which 14% predict would get banned, but most actually think it will stay the same. Any monster effects that linger usually get the axe by Konami, and Dweller can be very strong against tiers and in the mirror can be a little toxic, but it survived until now, probably will survive another list. On to Sprite now, we have Elf, where almost a third believe this card will get limited. Now while limiting it would do nothing for tier limits, for Sprite it would definitely be huge as it completely kills their grind game. Honestly, Elf is so strong that I think in the future it could potentially even be a card that will get banned, but right now nerfing Sprite more than tiers would not make much sense unless tiers get a noticeable hit as well. Then we have Blue, which most predict will just remain the same, technically the best of the main deck sprites, but this I believe has not been hit in the OCG either. On the other hand, we have Jet, which actually did get limited in the OCG. Now the results for Jet's essentially the same as what we saw for Blue. At this point, the main deck sprite monsters probably will not get any hits, but maybe something to be considered for the future. And then we have Starter, which is another card that was limited in the OCG. Almost half the respondents predicted that this card would get limited as well, and I think that it's fair, and it could happen if a lot of hits for tier happen as well, and bring them both down a peg. A really strong card on its own, and is definitely a card that will get hit at some point if not on the next list. Next we have Swap Frog, which almost all believe nothing will get hit. Now for me, I originally thought that this card would get limited, but they ended up banning Ronin Toad instead, which was also an understandable move. Toad is very strong, so we can't really have Swap at 3 and have Ronin legal right now in my opinion, and I do play Sprite myself. Speaking of Toad, looks like most do not expect any hits for this card. It did get the ban in the OCG I believe, and Toad is just so strong when it gets revived back with Elf, not to mention it gives Sprite players follow up by allowing it to return a Nimble Beaver to hand for example after negating. Definitely no point of limiting it as Sprite only needs one, so it's going to be either a ban or stay unlimited. Now onto some Flunder cards, and we do have Dimension Shifter, which surprisingly most actually believe that it will remain the same. It's definitely a dominant card and is very luck based in terms of allowing you to win if you draw this card, but in a way is a necessary evil right now with tier limits being so strong. The OCG did semi-limit this card, so if tiers get some key hits, perhaps this can be pegged down a bit for us as well. And then we have the Flunder Field spell, which a quarter predicted would get limited. It's a very strong spell that enables plays on their turn and then on the opponent's turn when they normal summon, so it could potentially be a card to hit to make the deck less consistent. Next we have Barrier Statue, and over 80% predicted this card would get banned. So the OCG banned this and so did Master Duel, so perhaps it's finally time for this to go in the TCG as well. It's an impressive card and can very easily be brought out in Flunder, and the Simorgh Link had gotten banned in the past, mostly because of this card. Hopefully this card can finally go to rest. Another Saki card for Flunder is the Featherstorm, which will just stop the opponent from playing for the turn, and there's really nothing to stop this now that Red Reboot is banned. But looks like most players don't think this card will get hit, so let's hope Flunder at least gets some hits in other ways. Then we have Bistro Magma, which recently got limited in the OCG, and almost half predict this card will get limited in the TCG as well. Quite the new card, so it's definitely possible that this does not get any kind of hit anytime soon, but I do think that it will get limited for sure at some point in the future. Bestials are very strong right now, and this is the best one and can get you another Bestial for the end phase, and just keeps things rolling. Next we have Mind Hacker, which I had asked as a preemptive hit for Kashtira, about to become a tier 1 strategy. At this point looks like most did not think anything will happen, but I guess we will have to see how Kashtira will actually impact the meta before we can make any decisions like these. And then we have Pot of Prosperity, which about a quarter predicted would get limited or semi-limited on the next list. After watching Potted Desires get limited and now put back to 2, I do think Prosperity will definitely get hit to 1 or 2 in the near future. This card is just too good and is commonly seen in decks like Flunder and Sprite, making them stronger than they already are, particularly post-side, and is a card that probably needs to get slapped a bit. Lastly, we have Artifact Scythe, which when you asked this about a half a year ago, most would think that this card would get banned. Almost surprising that we still have about a quarter of the respondents predicting this card will get banned, but to be fair, it's definitely a degenerate card, and it's best if it just goes away so that it does not return with some next tier 1 deck that can abuse Scythe. Now, some other potential cards that respondents suggested as possible hits for unlimited cards include Kashtira Fenrir, where most predicted would get limited or semi-limited. Definitely a strong card, but with Kashtira about to become the new tier 1 archetype, I don't think Konami will hit this anytime soon. Another card that was commonly suggested was Branded Fusion to 1, and right now I think it's fine at 3, but post Cyberstorm access, this card may get the consideration again to be hit to 1 or 2, as it's definitely a very strong spell. Lastly, some suggested a limit to Runic Fountain as well. Runic decks are still decently popular at the moment, but definitely not dominating, so this likely will not get any hits on the next list at least. Now on to some semi-limited or limited cards, and we start with Instant Fusion. Seems like a pretty half split between people predicting it will get banned or stay the same at 1. Definitely a Saki card and really allowed tiers to go off and play around Bestials and getting to kit. Was hoping this card got banned in that last shortlist, but hopefully Konami bans this card this time around. And then we have Call by the Grave, which is a card that is not played as much as it once was, at least for this format, and looks like 3/4 feel that this will stay the same at 1. A hot debate for this card all the time, but for now, likely just stays the same. And then we have Gazelle, which clearly Salamangreat is doing nothing right now, so perhaps it's time to finally bring this to 2, and then eventually put it to 3. Looks like almost half believe this card could come to 2 as well, and it's surprising to think that this was once the most dominant deck in the format. Another classic archetype that could use some help is Dinos, but it looks like most predict Misk will still stay the same at 1. Maybe Konami will be hesitant in bringing this card back because they tried that once and put it to 3 after limiting it a while back, and eventually a while later Dinos ended up becoming a tier 1 strategy, and since then Misk has been put to 1. Next we have Recital Starling, which was also put to 2 on the last list to give literalist decks a bone, and while Bird Up is still definitely a solid playable deck right now, I think that this card can just come back to 3 as Konami normally does with cards they put on the semi-limited list. Another semi-limited card is Pot of Desires, which got that surprise hit on the list not that long ago. Looks like 2/3 still believe it will stay at 2, but the rest believe this could come back. I think it's definitely possible for it to come back to 3 as well. Some other potential limited cards that people predicted could change in the next list include cards like Terraforming, which people predict will get banned. Certainly some arguments for it, as it's a key card for top decks like Tearlaments and Flunder and future decks to come. Then people predicted Engage could come to 2, and that's perhaps possible considering that it is very difficult to play Striker right now, considering the Bestials and the Grave Shufflers just eat through their strategy. And lastly, Time Seal was another card that was suggested, where this card could just come back to 3 and no one would play it. On to the currently banned cards, we start with of course Maxx C, and looks like 90% predict it would stay the same and remain banned. Likely what will be the case, as this card just completely shifts deck building and meta on itself, and I have no idea how the OCG still has this card legal. And then we have Harp Horror, which is a favorite among players for it to come back to 1, but sadly looks like Konami is not doing that anytime soon. I do believe it will get released at some point. Another classic card is Colossus, but unfortunately this card does not get nearly as much love as Harp, as 85% predict it will remain banned. Its draw and lock effect is very strong and can mess up with a lot of upcoming meta strategies, so probably too good to come back right now. Then we have Electromite, which sadly also people predict will stay banned. Pendulums are still not doing too much right now despite the release of the new Draco Slayer cards, as it only has a good matchup against Tears for the most part and it's still an uphill grind. Would be nice to have Electromite back, but perhaps this won't change for now. And then we have one of the Dragon Rulers in Blaster, where a third predicted this card would come back to 1. Dragon Rulers have been kinda ignored by Konami for a while, so probably not too hopeful for this one to come back yet. And lastly, we do have Ancient Fairy Dragon, which recently came off the ban list for the OCG as it got a new errata, so perhaps it is safe to assume that it will come back to the TCG as well. Then lastly, we have Ancient Fairy Dragon, which recently came off the ban list for the OCG as it got a new errata, so safe to assume that it will happen for the TCG as well on this next list. Some other currently banned cards that people predict will get released include Zenmaity, Block Dragon, and Glow Up Ball. I don't know too much about Zenmaity because I didn't play it back then, but Block Dragon in Adamanticators was so incredibly strong I don't think we're ready to have that back yet, or perhaps I'm wrong. Really depends on the other hits that will happen to the current best decks. Glow Up Ball is probably suggested because it was originally banned just as Hulk and Master Rule 5 was coming into place, so maybe it can come back now that Hulk is banned. Lastly, looks like only about 27% of the respondents are satisfied or very satisfied with the current format, so this is definitely much lower than when this was last asked, before the whole Ishizu tier stuff came out. While tier 0 formats won't be fun for many, at least it's not some FTK format, at least, I guess. Likewise, most seem to really dislike this format compared to the last format, and the format is about to change quite a bit with the new Kashtira stuff, although I'm a bit doubtful that the change will be for the better. Let's hope some big shakeups with this new list. And lastly, it looks like almost half the respondents predict that the next ban list will come out in February, with another big chunk predicting for March. The current list was announced in November but took place at the start of December, so definitely not crazy to think that they will at least announce the list sometime in February, although perhaps they wait to see if the Kashtira stuff will balance things out by itself. Alright guys, so that was it for the summary of the ban list predictions. Hope you enjoyed that, and a big thanks again for those of you that participated. As always, a big thanks to my Patreons, Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Barrel Lord, Spooky Boogie, Stephen Phillips, and Chaz Blanks as always for supporting the channel. You guys are great. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, link down below. Take care guys.